I grew up in Wyoming, but for some reason, my family usually went camping in Colorado. I guess the mountains there were just a little different, maybe a little bigger, or the air smelled different. We had this old 1976 Ford Country Squire, a big wood-paneled station wagon that was as slow as a turtle but carried all our camping gear and people comfortably. I was about 12 years old, and it was the early 80s. The memories from that trip still stick with me like it happened yesterday. We were camped somewhere high up in the Colorado mountains. The night was cold, colder than I expected. I remember waking up in the middle of the night, shivering under my sleeping bag, the kind of cold that gets into your bones and makes you feel like you can't breathe right. I was in the tent with my brother, who was maybe a year or two younger than me. He was sound asleep, curled up beside me, but I was freezing. I decided to get out and go warm up in the car. The tent was cramped, and to get out, I had to drag my sleeping bag over my brother. I could hear him groan and mutter something about having to pee, but I knew it was just an excuse. He always wanted to tag along whenever I moved around. I pulled the tent flap open slowly, trying not to wake anyone else, but the cold hit me like a slap. Outside, the world was dark, and the sky was a deep blue-black. The only sounds were the wind through the pine trees and the occasional snap of a twig. I stepped out, rubbing my arms to try to warm up. The ground was hard and frosty beneath my feet. I told my brother I was going to the car, but as I started walking, the first signs of dawn began to show up over the mountains. A faint, orange glow stretched across the tops of the pine trees and the rocky ridges. Instead of heading straight to the car, I paused and looked out toward the horizon. The light was soft and beautiful, the kind of early morning light that makes you feel peaceful even when the air is freezing cold. My brother wasn't convinced. He came out behind me, still yawning and rubbing his eyes. He asked what I was doing, and I told him I thought I'd stay up and watch the sunrise. I pointed to the light on the mountain. I was excited to see the day start because it made me forget how cold I was. He frowned and said, "That's not where the sun comes up. It comes up over there," and pointed in a different direction. I rolled my eyes, knowing he was just trying to argue because he was a Cub Scout and liked to be right. I was the older sibling, and it felt like my job to prove him wrong. So I argued back, telling him the sun had to be coming up where I saw the light. Our voices were quiet but loud enough to wake our parents, who were still sleeping in the other tent nearby. My dad poked his head out just enough to see the early light, and then his face changed. It wasn't just the dawn light. That bright orange-red glow was wrong, too bright and too angry for a simple sunrise. I remember the way his eyes narrowed, and he pulled the tent flap open wider, standing up fast. I could tell right away from the way he looked that he knew exactly what it was: a forest fire. The glow wasn't peaceful anymore. It was bright and spreading across the mountain. The sky behind it had started to turn dark orange, like the whole world was on fire. The smell of smoke was faint but sharp, even that early in the morning. I felt a chill run through me, but it wasn't from the cold anymore. It was fear. Without any delay, my dad began packing things up. We didn't waste time taking out anything from the tent or gathering more supplies. We just collapsed the tent as fast as we could, the poles banging against the ground, and shoved it and everything else into the back of the Ford. I remember the rough feel of the canvas and the crunch of the tent poles mixing with the rustle of sleeping bags and backpacks as we shoved everything in. My mom was quickly waking up too, moving fast but calm. My brother looked scared but tried not to show it. My dad climbed into the driver's seat, and the engine started with a grumble. The car was loaded, and we were ready to go. Dad didn't say much, just told us to buckle up and hold on. We headed down the narrow gravel road that led out of the campsite. The road was winding and steep, and the kind of place where if you lost control, you could easily fall off into a canyon or worse. There were no guardrails, just the dirt road hanging over the edge. The dust from the tires floated in the still, smoky air as we drove, and every few minutes, my dad glanced over his shoulder at the orange glow chasing us down the mountain. The fire was growing fast. The smoke thickened with every turn we took, filling the windows with a grayish haze. My throat started to scratch, and my eyes watered a little. I tried not to look out too much because it made the whole situation feel worse. The trees on the mountainsides were dark shapes against the red sky, and every now and then, the orange flames would flare up higher between the branches. Dad kept his foot heavy on the gas, but the road was rough and slow going. He talked quietly, saying everything was going to be fine, that we were ahead of the fire, but I could hear the tension in his voice. The car's headlights cut through the smoke, but the world outside seemed like it was closing in around us. After what felt like forever, we saw the flashing lights of a game warden's truck coming out from a side road. Dad pulled the car over and rolled down the window. The warden spoke with Dad for a few minutes. He told us the fire was spreading faster than anyone expected and that he was going around evacuating campers from other sites. I remember the warden's eyes looking worried but trying to stay calm. We got back on the road, still moving as fast as we could. The fire was behind us, but the smoke was thick and choking, and the danger felt real and close. I couldn't stop thinking about the way the trees were burning, how fast the flames could jump from one place to another. The wind shifted, and suddenly the smoke pushed forward, blanketing everything in a dark cloud. The car's heater was on full blast, but the heat inside the car was nothing compared to the cold fear growing in my chest. I kept looking out the window, watching the mountain get smaller behind us and hoping the fire wouldn't catch us. My brother sat quietly, clutching his jacket, not saying a word. We didn't stop until we were safely down the mountain, back on the main highway. The air was clearer here, and the sky looked less like it was burning. My parents finally let us relax a little, and I remember the relief washing over me like a wave. When we got home, I couldn't stop thinking about how close we came to being trapped up there. I had seen people on the news talking about wildfires since then, the way fire jumps and moves so fast it can trap people in minutes. I'd watch those videos and feel a cold prick of fear in the back of my mind, remembering that morning when my family had to escape a forest fire in the Colorado mountains. That trip taught me a lot about how quickly things can go wrong out in the wild. You think you're safe, but nature has its own plans, and sometimes you have to move fast or risk losing everything. I don't go camping without thinking about that fire and the smell of smoke in the cold mountain air. It's a quiet reminder that no matter how much you plan or how strong you feel, sometimes survival depends on luck and quick decisions. Now, whenever I see footage of wildfires out west or in Canada, I feel a tiny part of me tense up. It's that memory of that bright red glow over the mountain and the panic in the car as we raced down that winding road, the heat of the fire chasing us all the way home. It's a feeling that never really leaves you. Back in 2021, my husband and I planned a camping trip to Wyoming, somewhere we'd never been before. We found this spot at Boysen Reservoir, a place we'd heard was beautiful and pretty remote. When we booked the campsite, we were lucky to get what they called a beachfront site. It was right by the water's edge, with this sandy strip leading directly into the reservoir. From the photos, it looked perfect, like our own little private beach, and the idea of waking up to water right there was a dream. But there was a catch. The site was really far away from all the other campsites, so far that we basically had the whole area to ourselves. At the time, it felt like a blessing. We liked solitude, especially on a camping trip, away from noise and crowds. We thought this would be perfect. We drove in late afternoon, the sun starting to dip toward the horizon. The road to the site was a narrow dirt path, full of bumps and deep ruts. Trees and brush lined the sides, but the further we went, the more open it got, until finally, we reached the site. The ground was sandy and firm, perfect for our tent and the campfire ring already set up by the park rangers. We parked, unloaded, and got to work setting up. The air was dry and cool with that crispness Wyoming is known for. There was no noise except the occasional chirp of a bird or the soft lapping of the water on the shore. As we finished pitching the tent, the sky darkened fast. In Wyoming, the night comes hard and fast, especially out here where there was nothing to block the horizon. By the time we got the fire going, the stars were out in full force, clearer and brighter than anywhere else I'd ever seen. It was the kind of darkness that almost feels like a heavy blanket, swallowing everything around you. No distant city lights, no hum of traffic, no other campers calling to each other. It was dead quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you listen to your own breathing. We sat close to the fire, roasting some marshmallows and sipping on hot coffee. The warmth was welcome in the chill of the evening, and for a while it felt like we were the only two people on the planet. I remember looking out across the dark water and thinking how peaceful it all was. My husband and I hadn't had a trip like this in a while. Just the two of us, no distractions. We talked quietly, planning hikes for the next day, watching the fire crackle and send sparks into the sky. Then, out of nowhere, headlights appeared far down the road leading to our site. It was an SUV, big and black, with dark tinted windows. It rolled slowly toward us, which immediately caught my attention. We weren't expecting anyone else out here. This site was way off the beaten path, miles from other campers. My husband waved to the driver as they got closer, hoping maybe they were lost or needed directions. But the vehicle didn't slow down or respond. Instead, it drove straight past our camp, down the sandy stretch leading to the beach, and stopped. From where we sat, all we could see was the shape of the SUV parked by the water. The headlights were off now, and the tinted windows reflected the firelight, making it impossible to see inside. The car stayed there, motionless, for about 5 minutes. My husband and I exchanged looks. Something didn't feel right. The fact that the vehicle ignored us, ignored our wave and stopped there, so isolated, made us uneasy. Why would someone come out here just to park by the water, do nothing, then turn around and leave? After those minutes passed, the SUV started moving again. It slowly drove back up the road toward us. We both felt this tight knot in our stomachs. The SUV stopped briefly near our camp, just close enough for us to see it parked by the road. Then it just sat there for a moment. The silence around us felt thicker. My husband whispered that maybe we should pack up everything, just in case. I remember feeling this rush of adrenaline, that primal sense that something was wrong. We scrambled to gather our gear, tent, bags, chairs, throwing them in the back of the car. The fire was still crackling, but now it seemed more like a signal than comfort. My husband grabbed the flashlight and started shining it down the beach, checking for any signs of movement. We had a gut feeling they might have dropped someone off, someone watching us from the shadows near the water. It made no sense that the SUV would just drive away after all that unless someone else was still around. The whole time we were packing, the SUV was still there, parked at the edge of the beach. It wasn't making a sound, just sitting. Then, without warning, it started backing up and drove off in the direction it had come from. We wasted no time climbing into the car and locking the doors. My husband started the engine, and we pulled onto the bumpy dirt road as fast as we could without losing control. That's when it happened. The same SUV came back, speeding down the road after us. Its headlights were on now, bright and aggressive, cutting through the dark night. The road was narrow, uneven, and twisting through the wilderness. We had to drive carefully to avoid the potholes, rocks, and patches of mud. To make things worse, huge animals, deer, maybe even elk, were known to wander into the road out here, especially at night. My husband had to swerve a few times, heart pounding, as something big darted across in front of us. The SUV stayed right on our tail, no signs of slowing down. "Do you think we can lose them?" I asked quietly, clutching the door handle. My husband didn't answer. His focus was total, eyes sharp on the road ahead. He turned on the high beams, trying to get a better view of the path. At one point, we entered a narrow canyon, cliffs rising on either side, making it harder to see around corners. The road was even more dangerous here, steep drop-offs on one side and dense trees on the other. My stomach twisted in knots with every sharp turn. He glanced at me, voice steady but tense. "I have to go fast. Are you okay with that?" I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Just get us out of here." We pressed the accelerator, the car's tires kicking up dust and gravel as we sped through the canyon at 80 miles per hour. The roar of the engine was loud, but the night swallowed it up, leaving just the tension in the car. Every few seconds, the SUV's headlights appeared behind us like a predator's eyes. I kept looking in the rearview mirror, heart racing, waiting for it to crash into us or block the road. The chase went on for about 10 minutes, each turn and bump in the road making my hands shake on the steering wheel. At one point, we almost hit a big rock, and I shouted a warning just in time for my husband to swerve. The SUV was relentless, but then, after we passed through the narrowest part of the canyon, it suddenly disappeared. We didn't hear its engine anymore, and the road behind us was empty. We didn't slow down until we reached a small town about 20 miles away. Only then did my husband finally exhale and pull the car to the side of the road. I sat back, chest heaving, feeling like I just escaped something terrible. The silence in the car was heavy. Neither of us spoke for a long time, just staring out the windows, replaying the whole experience in our minds. Even now, we talk about that night sometimes. We wonder who those people were, why they came to that isolated campsite, and what might have happened if we hadn't listened to our instincts and left when we did. The fact that they chased us for miles through those dangerous roads tells us they were up to something bad. Maybe they were watching for other campers, or maybe they just wanted to scare us off. But whatever their reason, I know one thing for sure: we were lucky to get away. That trip to Boysen Reservoir wasn't the peaceful getaway we imagined. Instead, it became the most terrifying night of our lives, a reminder that sometimes the wilderness holds dangers beyond the wild animals and dark woods. We never went back to that site again, and every time we drive past those empty stretches of road in Wyoming, I can't help but feel a cold shiver, remembering the black SUV, the silent beach, and the chase that nearly cost us everything. About 8 years ago, I set out on a road trip that would take me from southern Ontario all the way down the eastern coast of the US, then across the southern states to California. I was alone, driving a reliable old sedan packed with camping gear, clothes, and a few essentials for the trip. I planned to see as much as I could, stopping wherever looked interesting. The idea of camping and hiking in new places was a big part of why I did this. I'm an experienced backpacker, mostly in boreal and mixed forests back home, where rain and cold weather are common, and I know how to handle rough conditions. But this trip took me into new territory, both literally and figuratively. When I reached Utah, I made a spontaneous decision to spend some time in Bryce Canyon National Park. I had seen pictures before, those towering red hoodoos, the steep cliffs, and the vast open sky. I wanted to hike through the canyon and camp overnight near the bottom, imagining clear skies and the quiet solitude of the desert night. I drove into the park during the late afternoon and parked near one of the trailheads that led down into the canyon. My pack was heavy, filled with all the usual gear: tent, sleeping bag, stove, food, water. I had plenty of water, which I knew would be important in such a dry place. The air was dry and warm, but there was something different about the light, the sharp edges of the rocks, and the way the wind blew dust across the trails. It was nothing like the thick forests I was used to, where the ground is soft with pine needles and moss. Here, the dirt was hard, cracked, and dusty. The plants were scrubby, sparse, and tough, clinging to life in this harsh environment. The hike down into the canyon was steep but not difficult. The trail switchbacked through bright orange and red rock, with views opening up behind me as I descended. I kept an eye on the sky, which was mostly clear, but far off to the west, I noticed a line of dark clouds building. I didn't think much of it. Where I come from, rain clouds are a regular thing, and you learn to expect sudden weather changes. But in the desert, rain is rare and usually gentle, so I thought it might pass or at worst be a short shower. I found a flat spot near the base of the canyon that seemed perfect for setting up camp. It was surrounded by tall, jagged hoodoos that rose like towers, casting long shadows in the fading sunlight. The ground was mostly hard-packed dirt with some loose stones. I pitched my tent carefully, anchoring it securely because of the occasional wind gusts. I unpacked my stove and prepared a simple meal, watching as the light dimmed and the shadows grew longer. The air cooled quickly now, a dry cold that felt sharp in my lungs. About an hour after I'd settled, I started to notice a faint sound, a trickling noise coming from a small gully nearby. At first, I thought it might be my imagination, or maybe a small stream hidden in the rocks. Then I looked down and saw a thin line of water running over the dusty ground, just a tiny trickle moving past my feet. I didn't worry at first. Water is a common sight in the forest when it rains, and little streams start from puddles all the time. But in this dry place, it felt strange. I looked back up toward the sky, and those clouds were definitely getting darker and thicker now. A soft wind had picked up, carrying a cool dampness that smelled faintly like rain. Within minutes, that small trickle of water began to grow. It spread quickly, like someone had turned on a faucet underground. The thin line became a shallow stream, moving faster and wider. The ground beneath my feet, which had been dry and firm, was now softening with mud and wet sand. I took a step back and realized something that sent a chill down my spine. I was standing at the bottom of a canyon that was about to fill with rushing water. The desert floor looked innocent enough, but I remembered that the ground was hard-packed and barely absorbed water. The rain that fell anywhere above would run off quickly down the slopes and cliffs, funneling into this narrow canyon. This wasn't going to be a gentle creek forming. This was going to be a sudden, fast-moving river. I started moving fast, throwing my gear into my pack as the water spread rapidly around my campsite. The small trickle at my feet was now a wide band of flowing water, thick with mud and small debris. The sound changed too, from quiet dripping to a roaring rush. I could hear rocks tumbling in the current, and the wind was picking up, carrying stinging drops of rain. I scrambled up the trail, climbing the steep slope as fast as I could. My boots slipped on the loose rock and mud. The water was rising quickly behind me, turning the trail I had just hiked down into a dangerous, slick slope. Looking down, I could see the area where I had just been. Now completely underwater, the ground washed away, rocks tumbling in the surge. My heart was pounding. I realized that if I had stayed even a minute or two longer, I might have been trapped by this sudden flash flood. The steep canyon walls meant there was no easy escape except the narrow trail I was climbing. If the water had cut me off or swept me away, I wouldn't have stood a chance. Finally, I reached a flatter spot near the rim of the canyon, where the water couldn't reach. I collapsed against a rock, breathing hard, soaked and trembling. The rain was coming down harder now, cold and relentless. The sky was dark, filled with heavy clouds that rumbled in the distance. Lightning cracked somewhere far off, but here, it was just the roar of the flood and the rain hammering down on the rocks. I sat there for a long time, watching the water pour through the canyon below. The trail I had just taken was now a river, cutting through the desert with a violence I had never expected. It was a stark reminder of how unpredictable nature could be, especially in places I thought I knew. That night, I stayed near the rim, in a sheltered spot under some overhanging rocks, waiting for the storm to pass. The temperature dropped sharply, and the wind howled through the canyon, carrying dust and the scent of wet earth. I was soaked, cold, and exhausted, but safe. The desert had shown me a side of itself I hadn't imagined. The sudden, raw power hidden beneath the calm. I think about that night often, how easily things could have gone wrong. It was a lesson in respect for the land and the weather, especially in places so different from where I grew up. In the forest, rain is normal, expected, and part of every trip. But in the desert, rain can turn the ground beneath your feet into a dangerous trap. I hadn't prepared for that because I hadn't thought about it. That almost cost me everything. A few months before that trip, I had another close call, but this time in the deep woods of Ontario's Algonquin Park. I was hiking late in the season with a small group, familiar with the area and the risks. We were walking a narrow trail surrounded by thick trees, fallen leaves crunching underfoot. It was quiet, almost too quiet, as we rounded a bend and suddenly spotted two small black bears crossing the path just a few feet ahead. They were cubs, young, curious, and unaware of us. They moved slowly, unconcerned, as if they owned the place. We didn't see any sign of a mother nearby, but we knew better than to wait and find out. Bears with cubs are extremely protective, and any wrong move could trigger a dangerous reaction. We stood frozen, watching as they crossed the trail and disappeared into the underbrush. Our hearts were pounding, adrenaline flooding through us. The bear's claws were sharp, their strength surprising for such small animals. Even though they were not grizzlies, just two black bear cubs, I knew instinctively that this was a moment to respect their space and get away quietly. We backed off the trail slowly, careful not to make sudden noises or movements that might attract attention. That encounter reminded me that nature's dangers are not just in harsh weather or remote places. They're in the wildlife, too, and sometimes the most ordinary moments can become tense and frightening. Both those experiences, the flash flood in Bryce Canyon and the bear cubs in Algonquin, taught me something important about wilderness and survival. No matter how experienced you are, no matter how confident you feel, the natural world can surprise you. It demands respect, constant attention, and humility. When I finally left Bryce Canyon, I was soaked and exhausted, but I carried with me a new awareness of how quickly conditions can change and how vital it is to stay alert. The desert looked peaceful again the next morning, with blue skies and dry rock, but I knew better now. I knew that beneath that calm beauty, danger could arrive in an instant, changing everything. That road trip was one of the most challenging and rewarding adventures of my life, filled with moments of wonder and moments of real fear. And those moments, the ones where you face the raw power of nature and live to tell the story, are the ones that stick with you forever. It had been a long day on the road, and we rolled into the campground just before dusk. I remember the air still held the warmth of the sun, but the breeze had started to cool down as the sky shifted from blue to shades of orange and purple. The campground wasn't secluded. There were maybe a dozen or so sites around us, and people were still up chatting by their fires or cooking. I could hear laughter from 2 sites over, kids running around with flashlights, the smell of something sweet drifting through the air. It didn't feel unsafe at all. If anything, it felt calm, comfortable, even like any normal camping spot you'd end up at after a long drive. We had one of those ultra-light tents, the kind with the netting up top and thin fabric walls that barely muffle sound. It's great for backpacking when you care about weight, but not so great when you want to feel safe or hidden. It was just me and my partner, well, ex-partner now, and we were both exhausted. I remember how sore my legs felt just from sitting so long in the car that day. I slipped into the tent while he finished cleaning up a few things. I didn't even blow up the pad all the way, just pulled the bag over me and let myself relax into the thin cushion, feeling the wind tug slightly on the sides of the tent. That's when I first heard it. The sound of footsteps, soft but close. It was quiet, deliberate. My first thought was a deer. We'd seen one earlier not far from the road, and it wasn't unheard of for animals to wander through campsites looking for scraps. But these weren't the uneven, nervous steps of a deer. It was paced, balanced, human. I didn't move right away, just listened. The steps passed by maybe 5 feet from the side of the tent. I held my breath, couldn't tell if they were trying to be quiet or if that's just how they moved. It was quick, though, a few steps and then nothing. I lay there, staring through the net top of the tent. The stars were just starting to come out. No moon yet. My partner climbed into the tent a few minutes later, and I didn't say anything at first. Thought maybe it was just someone heading back to their site. No big deal. I was trying not to make a thing of it. Maybe 20 minutes went by. The campground had quieted down a little but wasn't fully asleep. I could still hear someone poking at a fire and the low hum of a conversation, but it was starting to wind down. I had just started to drift off when I felt something change. You know that feeling? When your body picks up on something your brain hasn't caught up to yet. I opened my eyes. I couldn't hear anything at first, but I felt watched, like someone was right there. I turned my head slowly. There was a figure standing over the tent, just standing there looking down. For a second, I couldn't make sense of it. The silhouette was faint, but clear enough to know it wasn't a tree or a shadow. They were so close I could see the shape of their head outlined against the dim light from the campground. They weren't moving, just standing, looking straight into the mesh top of the tent. "Emi," I said. "Hey!" They moved immediately, not startled, not running, just turned and walked away fast, disappearing between the trees behind the site. My heart was hammering so hard I could barely hear anything else. I sat up, yanked on my hoodie and pants, and shook my partner awake. I told him someone had just been looking in the tent. He barely reacted, mumbled something like, "Probably nothing," and rolled back over. I stood there for a second, staring at him, not sure if I was more scared or angry. I unzipped the tent and stepped out barefoot onto the cold dirt. My skin felt electric. I looked around. Everything seemed normal. Fire still burning. Someone laughing off in the distance. The hum of a car idling way down the road. But there was nothing behind the tent. Just the trees and dark. I went to the car and sat inside, locked the doors and turned off the lights. The windows were cold against my arm. I sat there for a while, scanning the treeline, the space between sites, the edge of the road. I kept expecting to see someone come out again, but I saw nothing. Then I thought maybe I had overreacted. Maybe it was a drunk camper heading back to the wrong tent. Maybe they were embarrassed and that's why they walked off so quick. That made sense, right? I told myself that over and over, even though my stomach was still twisted up. Then I saw movement again. It was just a flicker of something behind the tent. Not close, but not far either. Back toward the edge of the site where the tree cover thickened. I leaned forward in the seat, watching. It was hard to tell with the shadows, but it looked like someone had stepped out from behind a tree, then ducked back. I sat frozen. Every hair on my arms was standing up. I got out of the car and called for my partner again. I didn't yell, not yet, but my voice was sharp. He groaned, unzipped the tent and asked what the hell I wanted. I told him someone was still back there, watching us. He told me again that it was nothing, just a drunk. Maybe I was tired, maybe imagining things. He didn't even get up. I wanted to shake him, wanted to scream, but I didn't. I just went back to the car and locked myself in again. Maybe 10 minutes later, I couldn't tell exactly. I wasn't looking at the clock. A man walked down the campground road. Not toward our site, just down the main road that looped past all the sites. I saw him coming before he got close, but when he reached my car, he turned his head and shined a flashlight directly into my face. No warning, just that blinding circle of light burning into my eyes. I flinched, shielded my face. He didn't say anything, just kept walking. That was it. I was done. I threw the door open and shouted for my partner, full on yelling this time. I told him we were leaving. Now, I didn't care if he was tired. I didn't care if he thought it was nothing. Someone was creeping around, watching us, and I wasn't staying there another minute. He argued. Of course he did. But I wasn't asking. I was shaking, full of adrenaline and fear and rage. I started grabbing stuff and tossing it in the car. The guy had come back. I was sure of it. And now he knew I was awake and alone. We didn't even bother packing everything properly. Just shoved the tent in the back and took off. Pulled out of the campground road, hit the highway with the headlights cutting through empty blackness. I didn't stop shaking for miles. We pulled over in front of a hojo somewhere an hour or so down the road. I didn't even know the town. Everything was closed except for a gas station with a single flickering pump light. I called the ranger station, got a machine. Tried the non-emergency number for local police. No answer. Finally got someone with the tribal police, but they didn't seem interested. Took my name, the location, said they'd make a note. That was it. No one asked if we were okay. No one said they'd check it out. We didn't feel like checking into the hotel, and at that point, I didn't want to go inside a building. Didn't want walls. We ended up pulling off onto a wide gravel turnout down some road past the last streetlight and just slept in the car. Or tried to. I barely closed my eyes. Every time I did, I saw that flashlight in my face, that figure standing over the tent. But in the morning, just as the sky started turning pale gray, we woke up to Monument Valley laid out around us. I didn't even realize we were that close. The desert stretched out forever in every direction. The air still and cold, completely silent. The sun was coming up behind the mesas, casting long shadows and painting the rock faces with gold and blood red. And behind us, the full moon was sinking slow over the plateau, hanging huge and pale in the sky. I stood outside the car with my arms wrapped tight around my chest, watching the land come to life. It was the kind of beauty that makes your chest ache, that kind that makes you feel so small and still somehow comforted, like the world is big enough to hold all your fear and still keep going. We didn't talk much after that, just stood there watching. My partner said something about heading back toward town, but I was barely listening. I was still thinking about how close that man had been, how no one believed me, how easy it would have been for him to wait until I fell asleep, how thin that tent wall really was. We drove in silence after that. I didn't feel safe again for days, maybe weeks, but that sunrise over Monument Valley, that's something I'll remember for the rest of my life. A quiet kind of peace after a night full of fear. A reminder that sometimes, even when the world feels dark and unsafe, it still finds a way to show you something beautiful. I don't know what I was looking for, exactly. I just had the urge to go off the trail. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe boredom. We'd been hiking Palo Duro Canyon for a couple of days, camping in a more remote part of the park. Not completely out in the middle of nowhere. There were still other campers a few miles away, and the trail wasn't far, but far enough that you felt like you could vanish out there and no one would notice for days. I liked that feeling. I've always liked pushing into places people don't normally go. That day, the sun was high, maybe 1 or 2 in the afternoon, and the wind was picking up like it does out there sometimes, all dry and sharp, cutting through your clothes no matter how hot it is. I left the trail just past a sharp bend, walking along a ridge that looked like it led to a small drop-off or ledge. I didn't tell my wife I was heading off. She was back at camp taking a nap. We'd already been hiking for most of the morning, and I still had a little left in me, so I figured I'd do some exploring and be back before she even noticed I was gone. I had my day pack, just a small one with some snacks, a water bottle, a flashlight, and a compact first aid kit. I didn't think I'd need any of it, honestly. I just wanted to stretch my legs and look around. The terrain out there is red clay and loose rock, with some scrub brush and little caves formed in the cliffs. It's all dry and dusty, with this brittle, ancient silence that settles on everything. The kind of place where your footsteps sound loud, even when you're trying to be quiet. The wind echoes in weird ways, bouncing off walls and into gullies so that you can't always tell where it's coming from. That day, it was blowing hard enough that you could feel the grit getting in your teeth, sticking to your sweat. I walked maybe 2-3 miles off trail. Nothing crazy, just a slow wander along what I thought was a solid route. I stayed up high, following the edge of a narrow ridge that gave me a view out across the canyon. Every now and then I'd spot one of those little cave mouths, most of them too shallow or too narrow to get into, just places where the rock had eroded over time. I kept going, probably farther than I should have, but I didn't feel tired. It was one of those days where everything feels still, where you think nothing can go wrong because nothing has yet. Then the ground gave out from under me. There was no warning. One step it felt solid, and the next I was falling. It wasn't a dramatic, tumbling fall like in the movies. It was more like the earth just opened up and took me in. The red clay crumbled beneath my feet and I dropped straight down into this narrow chute. My boots scraped against the sides, loose rock and dust came with me, and I slid hard, maybe 10 or 12 feet in a matter of seconds. Just a steep, tight, dusty shaft that seemed to go deeper than it had any right to. I didn't even have time to yell. The chute was only a couple of feet wide, narrowing as it went down, and my pack, thank God, jammed up between the walls and stopped me. The bottom of the chute just vanished into black. I don't know how far it went. I don't want to know. If I hadn't been wearing that pack, I would have slid all the way down. Could have been 20 feet, 50, maybe more. The canyon's full of those weird formations, old erosion channels and hollowed out spaces you'd never know were there unless you dropped into one. My heart was racing so hard I thought it might burst. I didn't scream or cry. I didn't have time to. I just froze. The wind howled faintly above me, but down in that chute, it was dead silent. Just the sound of dust settling and my own breathing, loud and fast and panicked. My arms were pinned at my sides by the pack, and I could feel my legs dangling. My feet couldn't touch anything solid. There was nothing below me but air and darkness. I stayed like that for maybe a minute, maybe 5. I don't know. Time does weird things when you're terrified. My mouth was dry, and I could feel the red dust in my nose, my eyes, everywhere. I wanted to scream for help, but I knew no one would hear me. Not out there. Not that far off trail. I hadn't told anyone where I was going. If I fell deeper, no one would find me. Not in time. Probably not ever. Eventually, my brain started working again. I told myself I had to move. Slowly, carefully, I tried to shift. My left shoulder was wedged tighter than the right, and I used that to my advantage. I dug my elbow against the wall of the chute and tried to inch upward. The clay crumbled every time I pressed against it, but I kept trying. Shimmying upward wasn't easy. The chute wasn't straight. It twisted slightly, and every movement felt like I might lose what little hold I had and slide deeper. It took everything I had. Every muscle in my arms, my back, my legs straining to push and wedge myself higher. I couldn't turn around. I couldn't lift my head more than a few inches. I had to twist my body and push in these weird angles, 1 inch at a time, each one taking more effort than the last. My boots kept slipping against the walls. Every time I made a little progress, I'd slide back an inch or two. My fingers scraped against rough stone. My knuckles split open. I didn't even notice until later that I was bleeding. I don't know how long it took. Maybe 20 minutes, maybe longer. But finally, I felt air on my face. Real air, not the stale, dry stuff that had filled the chute. I reached up and touched open space. I found a root, just a little thing but strong enough, and used it to haul myself up over the edge. I rolled out onto solid ground and just lay there for a while, breathing dust and staring at the sky. The sun had shifted. I could tell I'd been down there longer than I thought. I was shaking. My hands were filthy and scraped raw. My legs were covered in red clay, and my pack was torn at one of the straps. But I was out. I was alive. I looked back at the hole I'd come out of, and I couldn't believe it. You couldn't even tell it was there unless you were right on top of it. The chute was hidden between 2 crumbling ridges, just a crack in the ground. A little darker than the rest of the dirt, maybe, but otherwise invisible. I tried marking it with a rock, something, but everything blended together in that dry, red landscape. I felt this deep chill even in the heat, because if it had swallowed me whole, no one would have ever found me. I stood up, got my bearings, and made my way back to camp. My legs were jelly, and I kept stumbling. I don't even remember the walk clearly, just that it felt like it took forever. The whole way, I kept turning around to try and memorize the spot where I'd fallen. But everything looked the same. Ridges and rocks, dry clay, twisted brush. Nothing to tell one part from another. When I got back, my wife was still in the tent. I cleaned up quietly and didn't tell her right away. I just sat there for a long time, drinking water, staring at the dirt. Finally, I told her what happened. She didn't believe me at first. Who would? I didn't have pictures. There wasn't a scratch on my clothes besides the dirt. But she saw my hands. She saw my face. The next day, I took her out there. Or I tried. I was so sure I knew the spot. I retraced my steps from where I'd left the trail, followed the ridge, past the same rock formations. Everything looked familiar until it didn't. We searched for over an hour, looping around, backtracking, climbing up and down. We never found the chute again. Not even close. The whole area looked different in the daylight. Less like a place and more like a memory I couldn't quite grab onto. It messed with me. Still does. I love caves. I love exploring tight, dark places most people avoid. But this was different. This wasn't a cave. It was like a mouth in the earth, waiting to swallow someone. And it almost did. I wasn't being reckless. I wasn't doing anything extreme. I was just walking. That's the part that gets me. How easy it was to disappear. It made me think about how many people go missing out in places like that. You always assume they must have made some huge mistake, gone off trail, done something stupid. But now I know sometimes the ground just gives way. Sometimes the land itself doesn't want you there. And if it catches you, it doesn't have to try very hard to keep you. I still hike. I still camp. But I stay on the trail now. And when I do go off, I tell someone exactly where I'm going. I carry more gear. I carry a beacon now, something that can send an SOS if I get stuck. I've learned how fast things can go wrong. It's not about fear. It's about respect. Respect for the land, for your limits, for the fact that you're not invincible just because you've done something 100 times before. I've crawled into tight cave systems, rappelled into sinkholes, explored lava tubes, and never felt the way I did in that chute. That was the closest I've ever come to disappearing. And I mean really disappearing. No trail, no witnesses, no sign. Just dust and time and red clay. I think about that moment a lot. That 1 second where my foot hit soft ground and everything dropped out from under me. Taught me something important. You don't get to go wherever you want just because you want to. Even the wild places deserve your consent. And sometimes they don't give theirs back.